Hi, happy Pride. My name is Derrick. I'm a political strategist, an LGBT activist, and the founder and CEO of Oath, which is a donation platform that helps donors direct their dollars to the causes and candidates that maximize the impact of their giving. Rabbi Andrea reached out and asked me to put together a presentation for you all on the current state of LGBT affairs around the country and the world, and what we all can do in order to engage and advance the fight for equality. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to jump into a presentation. Let's see here. Great. And so today, the theme really is going to be hope. We're going to talk about the challenges that the LGBT community faces, and we're going to be really blunt and real about those because they can be very scary. But we're going to really focus on how we can push forward and where we can find hope and energy to sustain the fight for equality. This year alone, there have been more than 500 anti-LGBT bills introduced in state houses across the country. It's a record number and follows a previous record from last year, 2023, when we saw over 450 bills introduced. This has really taken off since 2018, when the first anti-trans bills were really getting started in state legislatures, and it's just grown exponentially since then. At the same time, there's been an increase in the number of anti-LGBT extremists who are in office and a worsening of the rhetoric that they are entering into our political atmosphere. Overall, this is these separate threats are combining to create a true degradation of the environment for LGBT people and their ability to feel safe in their communities and push forward legislation and policies that can support the diverse needs of the LGBTQ plus community. So both of these trends are incredibly alarming. In addition, we are really drilling down into what the result of all this anti-LGBT legislation and increasingly extreme politicians is. So first and foremost, incredibly harmful rhetoric coming from politicians. We see an increase in calls to suicide hotlines from LGBT young people when anti-trans and anti-LGBT policies are introduced and spoken about on TV in their state. And so this cycle has repeated again and again, and the rhetoric has gotten worse and worse. We hear a lot about people calling LGBT people groomers or accusing them of really outlandish things. And that dates back to the 70s, is a very old strategy for trying to delegitimize LGBT equality. In addition to the anti-LGBT legislation that we've seen sort of sweeping the country, they've also gotten much more aggressive in the nature of the legislation. So there are new bills that are targeting the families of trans youth, accusing them of child abuse for following best practice medical care in providing healthcare for their trans young people and their trans kids. And so there's a ton of misinformation and disinformation about what that really means and what trans healthcare looks like, what gender affirming care looks like. And Republicans and just the conservative anti-LGBT movement in general are taking advantage of that disinformation, misinformation, and confusion in order to sow more distrust of the fight for equality as a whole. And finally, we've really seen an increase in the threats and actual attacks on Pride events this month. Obviously, the reason that we're having this talk is Pride Month, and LGBT people gather in cities all across the country, both big cities like New York and small towns. And there have been an increasing number of events canceled or scaled back, both because of threats to those events, as well as corporate sponsors pulling out as they feel the backlash, and as they fear the backlash, excuse me, for participating in Pride and supporting the LGBT community after companies like Bud Light have been in the crosshairs for the far right movement. And so where is all of this anti-LGBT legislation coming from? Who are the people that are pushing it? Let's talk about both. Well, more than 25% of all of the anti-LGBT bills are coming from just 5 states: Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, South Carolina, and Kansas. Some of these may not surprise you, but what's important to note is that in these states, a lot of the legislators feel like this is a winning issue for them at the ballot box, that whether or not they personally believe in this anti-LGBT legislation, whether they've personally been radicalized against our communities or not, they think that they can score political points by coming up with the most aggressive anti-LGBT bills and pushing that kind of hateful rhetoric. And this has real consequences. That's one of the reasons that at Oath, my political advising platform, we've really focused on the winnable races in these states, which are often overlooked by sort of the mainstream political environment, so that we can flip as many seats as possible and show that we have a presence in these states and we're willing to push deeper into red state territory in order to fight back against the anti-LGBT legislation that's being pushed forward by these people. And so I wanted to highlight just 3 of them here. There are literally dozens that are like this, but it shows how this extremism is becoming more mainstream. It used just 5, 8 years ago to be out of style to really talk about LGBT people in this way. You have Mark Robinson on the far right here, who's running for governor of North Carolina, is the Republican nominee, won a competitive primary for Republican nominee, and said that nobody should be talking to children about transgenderism, homosexuality, or any of that filth. So really just aggressive language this is coming from a candidate for governor in a swing state. So really showing how it's been mainstreamed. Here are 2 other state legislators, one of them pushing a drag ban, claiming that drag somehow sexualizes children, which is obviously preposterous. And Caroline Harris in Texas pushing forward a bill that would force prosecutors to prosecute parents of trans young people for seeking best practice medical care. Again, all of these parents are just trying to do right by their child. They're following the guidelines from the American Medical Association and every major medical association in the country. And now you have a whole group of people aiming to prosecute them for doing that. But it is not all doom and gloom. The threats are real and we need to be engaged for this fight, but you have to have hope in order to find a path forward. I always like to rely on Harvey Milk. One of my favorite quotes of his: you have to give them hope for a better world, hope for a better tomorrow. That is what this is really about. And that's what the LGBT community has always used in order to push our fight forward. We have faced worse odds than we face right now when you look at things like the AIDS crisis, pre-marriage equality, these ideas that we currently really have won over a majority of the American public with seemed really radical just 20 years ago, that LGBT people should be married, that they should be able to have children. And now a vast majority of Americans support both of those ideas. And so what does it look like to turn the tables on hate? Well, you can see here, this is just the number of anti-LGBT bills that were passed. Before I was talking about over 500 bills introduced, but how many of them are becoming law? Well, there was like a steady stream from 2015 after marriage equality, when the anti-LGBT movement wasn't quite sure what to do after they lost public support to marriage equality. And so it took them several years to try to figure out what their new boogeyman would be now that the world had not fallen apart after gays could marry. And they really landed on trans people around 2018. And so in this color, the striped section, you can see those are just the anti-trans bills. And around 2018, you start to see them creep in. And then there's an exponential increase from 2020 into 2021, 2022, an explosion in 2023. And these are just the bills that were passed. So 2023 set a record by almost 10x what the pre-pandemic record was for how many anti-LGBT bills had been enacted into law, and where many millions of people are living under those laws right now. But the hope here and the cause for hope here is that we've actually defeated a much larger percent of the bills that were introduced in 2024 than we were able to in 2023. And that's because the extremists have overstepped. They are pushing bills that would restrict healthcare for all adults, not just young people. They are pushing bills to openly allow discrimination, to ban drag for all people, to put a tax on gay bars, like all kinds of really extreme policies. And I think the public is starting to have a backlash against that. And we've also just learned very quickly, the LGBT community has always had to learn and evolve how we can fight for ourselves and for each other. And we've seen that from 2023 to 2024, a mass mobilization of resources, of national organizations stepping in. And so we've more effectively engaged in fighting against these bills, and we've defeated a larger number of them. But 2024 still the largest number of anti-LGBT bills enacted in the last 10 years, aside from 2023. And so we need to bring that number all the way back down, really to zero. But it's going to take years for us to win these fights, for us to win hearts and minds the way that we did with marriage equality. And we have to keep pushing forward in order to do that. I also just wanted to highlight that while things have actually worsened for LGBT people in many ways over the last few years in the United States, abroad, it's much more mixed. And this is not a universal trend around the world. You can see here that in several countries, Thailand, Japan, Greece, Estonia, all moved towards marriage equality or enacted marriage equality in the past year, just in the last 12 months. And what we've seen, as we've seen in the United States, marriage equality is a pivotal step, not the finish line, but a pivotal step in the fight for equality, because it shows people and gives legal protection that relationships can be equal under the law. And it opens the door to a lot more important battles around anti-discrimination and things like that once you have that legal validation that your relationship is valid. Also, several countries have moved towards or outright decriminalized same-sex relations in the last year as well, which is also a win. There are still dozens of countries where it is a criminal act to be with the person you love if you're LGBT. So how can we push forward the fight? Well, I have 3 suggestions here, but the list honestly is much, much longer. First is to advocate for more inclusive policies. Illinois, I will say, has some great non-discrimination laws in place. I used to work at Lambda Legal with colleagues, including Jim Bennett, who has served for a long time in the Office of Human Rights in Illinois. And I know that they've worked very hard to put policies in place, but you would be surprised. The work is not done. There's still a long way to go. And so simply getting involved locally and trying to understand what policies can be changed. Here in New York, for example, gay men still cannot have access to any sort of fertility coverage for insurance policies from the city or from private healthcare as well. And so there's an ongoing fight in New York to make it easier for gay male couples to have children if they want to do so, and to be able to access those services that they need in order to do that and grow families. Second is about education and awareness. This always seems like the easy one, the throwaway one, but it's probably more important now than ever, as the fight is more and more focused on the anti-trans fight part of the far right movement. We need people to be more vocal allies for trans people. We know that if you personally know someone who is trans, you are many times more likely to say that society needs to be more accepting of trans people. And so there are not enough trans people. It's just a very small community, a small number of people to go around and meet every American. And so we rely on allies to do a lot of that facilitation as well. So you can be an ally by following trans leaders, amplifying their voices, consuming literature, movies, TV shows that include trans characters to try to bust stereotypes, and calling out bigotry, hatred, and sort of microaggressions when you hear them. It can seem very innocuous for someone to make that joke about Caitlyn Jenner, but it really is about creating an environment where people can feel safe being who they are rather than feel safe harassing others. And finally is mobilizing this grassroots support. This can include donating. Obviously, I, as a fundraiser for most of my career, am very focused on how to maximize the impact of dollars. And when it comes to the fight for LGBT equality, there are a lot of great options. You can look locally at your local LGBT center. Some of the groups that are doing work with LGBT youth, particularly homeless LGBT youth, in Chicago and surrounding areas, or you can look at national organizations, Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD, Transgender Law Center, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and many others are doing important work in order to fight the battles so that people can have the birth certificates that they need, get the relationship benefits that they need and that they're entitled to, fight back against discriminatory laws and the rhetoric that we saw earlier in the presentation, so that people can, again, feel supported in being who they are. That's what Pride is really all about. And we rely on allies to make that a reality this year, next year, and the year after. So thank you so much for engaging in Pride in a substantive way, for taking this as an opportunity for learning. I hope that you learned something here with me today, and I hope to be back with you again in the future, either for next Pride or maybe before if I'm in Chicago. Thank you so much.